So since the Ogre Arcana came out, more people are playing this hero, and this is a general guide and tips for Ogre, and mainly focused as Ogre being a position 5 support. You can also play this hero as an offlaner, but in this particular case we're looking at my own replay here, and this is really something that you don't want to do. You don't want to die for first blood, and Ogre becomes significantly weaker when you fall behind. So at the start of the game I ended up seeing that the Veno placed an observer ward here, which is pretty good that I'm buying the sentry afterwards. You generally might want to even buy that before you go for the runes. This Orb of Venom, I've looked through my replays of it and it really isn't that useful. And in particular you'll end up seeing kind of why it's not that great, especially in this matchup. So in this particular matchup, what's important here is for the enemy's kill potential is Venomancer's Venomous Gale. This uses a lot of mana, so he can only use it maybe 2-3 times in the laning stage until he dies and respawns and he can use the mana again. So really all that I can do here is just trade with Harass, especially with this Orb of Venom. That's ideally what you want to do, and on level 1 Ogre has a big advantage to be able to constantly be right clicking like this and not to be aggroing the creep wave. So once Spirit Breaker leaves the lane, Veno becomes significantly weaker and he really doesn't want to fight, so this is where I bully him out of lane. This is really something that you actively want to do. I was a little bit slow to react to this rotation, but the stun ends up cancelling the TP here and works out pretty okay. Veno is still alone in lane, Spirit Breaker is coming, and Sven manages to survive here, but we end up catching the Veno who pushed up a little bit too far. So the Orb of Venom did work out there in that scenario, but if you look at the amount of gold that I ended up getting for the kill, it was relatively small. And now that Veno's respawned and come back to lane, my Sven ends up dying here as well. So it wasn't really all that amazing of an item. And once Veno gets to level 3 or 4, he ends up just being able to control this lane. So pulling the creeps like this, ideally I would want to pull the entire creep wave there, but I end up failing it. And you'll see straight away how this impact makes a difference. Here trying to kill Venomancer, but because the creep wave is pushed, Veno can constantly stay in lane and we can't kill him. And I end up failing another pull here because I was mistimed again, and Veno can still stay in lane. Now once Veno's hit level 4, it's very hard to even go up and close to him to harass him, especially since he died and he is now his mana filled back up with Venomous Gale. So just doing a little bit of harass isn't very useful. And if I go too close to him, I can't really out-trade him, and Spirit Breaker can come charge and kill either me or Sven. And that's really all about that we can do here. So now that Veno is alone and we know that Spirit Breaker is charged away here, I end up placing a ward behind the tower. Then we go on Veno, but it's obvious that if we keep pressuring this Veno, the Sven would end up dying in this scenario. So he would rather just get some last hits instead and just keep Veno out of the way. And this actually works out really well because you look here that Sven has 40 last hits and he's at the top. And I think at 10 minutes he ends up having a total of 65 last hits, which is not bad, especially seeing as the fact that he stayed in lane most of the time, and I think he died once or twice. So if we have a look at my skill build now, I'm maxing out Bloodlust and I have 2 points in Fire Blast. The main reason why I'm doing this, and this has become like the most popular build, I did not create this, but the reason why is because if you go Ignite and you max this out, people will keep buying more regen, and now because everyone has their own courier, they'll keep flying out the regen to themselves over and over again. So it's more important just to be able to burst people down and have this crowd control. So this is the big advantage of it. And you see here with the Bloodlust Bloodseeker, he's able to run at 700 movement speed, and as well you can keep using your Bloodlust on your carry. And in this particular case it's worked out really well for us because Sven has decided to max out his Great Cleave, and I'm giving him Bloodlust level 4, and this is at 12 minutes into the game. So this guy is going to be farming really fast, and at the same time Sven can't really stay in lane if Venomancer stays around, and he can also get charged globally by the Spirit Breaker. So I want to highlight something that happens quite often in matches where the offlaner pushes down the safe lane tower, and then the supports come as well with the offlaner and try and control the enemy's safe lane and go into their jungle and pretty much ward it and take over this area. And you see that they have an observer ward here on the Radiant side, and I ended up coming along a minute later dewarding it. And you really don't want to let him have any sort of vision in these locations, mainly because of the fact that the Sven could get charged by Spirit Breaker. It's a really easy way to set up a gank plus with combination with Pudge. If the enemy was smart, what they would do is they would smoke into the jungle and take advantage of the fact that they don't have this sort of vision. Now I end up placing another observer ward here, and the enemy comes back to this exact location. 2 minutes later, the Veno is here and the Pudge comes with his own observer ward, and my team are here to defend this vision, and they end up catching a Pudge kill here and dewarding Pudge's observer ward. Now at this point I put down another observer ward in the same spot. That could potentially get dewarded, but then Pudge comes and places observer ward here and constantly denying the enemy vision to go in and get these easy ganks, as well as this observer ward that's down here that still lasted all this duration. So if we have a look at this Sven here coming up to 20 minutes, he has 175 last hits, so he's averaging 11 last hits per minute over the past 10 minutes. And that's pretty impressive, especially since the fact that he has been pushing objectives, he has been joining his team and really doing stuff as well. It's not just sitting AFK in the jungle. And this is really the big advantage of going this maximum bloodlust build. But if you don't really have a hero that can utilize this bloodlust that well, there's still always heroes that you can use it on to go and join fights and stuff, like this Bloodseeker for being able to run people down. Just that extra attack speed really plays out. And the Orb of Venom, you just end up selling it afterwards. You see that I have this in my backpack. It's kind of overkill and you don't get to utilize it that much overall for how expensive the item is. I just think that looking through my replays and seeing some of the matches, this Orb of Venom doesn't really come to much use, and you would be better off buying something like Mangoes and you get that passive health regen in lane. Later in the game, it's really important about where you're using your spells. Ogre Magi doesn't do a huge amount of damage, so look at how I end up using a spell. So here you Bloodlust the Sven at the start, so it'll have Bloodlust throughout the entire fight. And on top of this, we end up using Ignite onto the Pudge, which is kind of unfortunate that Sven also uses stun at the same time. But ideally, that's what you really want to be doing and emphasizing most of the time, is where you're using the spells rather than just spamming them all out at the very start of a fight. So as a position 5 support, you typically don't get enough gold to buy all your items. I literally never go Midas on this hero. It's probably why I have a pretty okay win rate on it. And the problem is that this time I decided to go Hooded Defiance because no one else was going to buy Pipe this game. If I ended up buying Force Staff, you'll see that this fight would play out way differently. I could just Force Staff Bloodseeker at this location. Even a Glimmer Cape would have been really good here. But instead what ends up happening is the enemy manages to get on top of us and pretty much wipes 4 out of our 5 team. Our Invoker just about gets out. But that was a really bad fight because Sven and Bloodseeker are worth the most amount of gold here. So not ideal. And Puck does go down afterwards. So that's like really small thing. Like people talk about not getting BKB as a carry, not buying Force Staff or Glimmer as a support is pretty much just as bad in that scenario. So in this particular game we're up against a Techies and he's pretty much controlling our part of the jungle. And there's not really much we can do. He's placing down tons of sentries, he has mines, and there's also a Pudge that can hook us into the mines. So going into our jungle is pretty much a bad idea, and you see this Riki ends up getting cut out by it and dies as a result. So instead what the rest of our team is doing, which is pretty much a much smarter decision, is to go into the enemy part of the jungle and find kills here. Now I have an observer ward placed here and another one placed over at this spot. Now the big advantage of doing this is that we can pretty much see any ganks that are coming and rotations, and we can see just a little bit of the shrine. So if we see a teleport coming in, we might end up seeing that too. This kind of small tree here is blocking it, so if you have someone with a quelling blade in your team, maybe you want to cut this one. But once it turns to Pudge comes up here and he dewards this. But in the meantime, 2 of his teammates have died at the same time with this deward, and it was kind of like a bad teleport from Jugger. So not much this Pudge could do. But you end up seeing Pudge's ward last literally a whole 40 seconds. Not very useful. Now Shadow Fiend ends up complaining that we have vision in our jungle. So Pudge buys a sentry ward. He puts one here. He puts a second one at this spot. A third one. And a fourth one. He finally finds an observer ward and kills it. During this time now, Shadow Fiend is getting caught. And you end up seeing that their team really isn't together. There's just 2 players here. And Techies is never going to join his team. And meanwhile, Slardar is low health and he's backing off, pretty much finishing off the game by getting a lot of kills one by one. So you really need to stay with your team, and this is something that I do as Ogre constantly. I'll always follow my teammates, even if there isn't really like kills to be gotten. Unless everyone is sitting back in the jungle, there is like 2-3 minutes at a time. I might end up jungling for a little bit, but you really don't need a lot of items on this hero. You can just end the game a lot of the time with maybe like something like arcane boots, and you can finish out the game, because a lot of matches that I play are only going around 30 minutes. So if you enjoyed this game and you want to see more Dota content like this, make sure you subscribe.